She stood on my terrace, overlooking the vineyard with the poise of someone who believed she'd already claimed victory, her emerald bracelet catching the late afternoon sunlight as she raised a glass of our finest Cabernet to her perfectly glossed lips. Victoria Sterling smiled at me with the kind of calculated warmth that could convince anyone she genuinely cared about my happiness. Her auburn hair styled in elegant waves that framed a face I'd grown to trust over the past 7 months. She complimented the lavender borders I'd spent 2 seasons perfecting, asked thoughtful questions about my pottery studio, and even offered to help coordinate the charity auction I'd been planning for weeks. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. What she didn't know, what her confident expression and designer dress couldn't protect her from, was that in exactly 18 minutes, my brother Ethan would walk through that wrought iron gate, carrying evidence that would transform her triumphant smile into the kind of raw terror that comes from realizing your carefully constructed lies are about to be exposed in front of 50 of Millbrook Valley's most influential residents. Victoria had no idea that I'd discovered not only her months-long affair with my husband, but also the devastating truth about her connection to the darkest chapter of our family's history. She didn't know that the woman she'd been systematically betraying, the woman whose marriage she'd been methodically destroying while accepting dinner invitations and offering business advice, had spent the last 3 weeks uncovering a conspiracy so calculated and cruel that it reached back 5 years to a tragedy that had nearly destroyed our entire family. Before we dive deeper into this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate justice, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever had that gut instinct that someone close to you wasn't who they claimed to be. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's revelation will shock you even more than today's, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when perfectly laid plans collide with the truth. As I watched Victoria charm my guests at what she believed was a routine fundraising event for my husband's city council campaign, every laugh, every graceful gesture, every moment of apparent sincerity felt like watching a master manipulator perform her final act. She moved through our gathering with the confidence of someone who'd studied every detail, memorized every weakness, and calculated exactly how to position herself for maximum gain, while inflicting maximum damage on the family that had welcomed her into their lives. The irony was almost artistic in its perfection. Victoria Sterling, the strategic communications expert who'd supposedly appeared in our lives like an answer to prayers we hadn't known we were making, was actually the woman whose testimony had sent my brother Ethan to prison for a crime that was far more complicated than anyone had understood at the time. The same woman who'd helped destroy his life 5 years ago was now positioned to steal mine, and she'd been executing this long-term plan with the patience and precision of someone who understood exactly what she wanted and how to take it. But what Victoria had underestimated, what her professional training in psychological manipulation had somehow failed to prepare her for, was the possibility that her target might possess the intelligence, resources, and sheer determination to fight back with the same level of strategic thinking she'd used against us. She'd spent months studying our vulnerabilities, our relationships, our financial situation, and our emotional triggers, but she'd missed the most crucial element of all: the unbreakable bond between siblings who'd survived tragedy together and would stop at nothing to protect each other from further harm. My name is Elena Rosewood, and I'm about to tell you how one seemingly perfect autumn afternoon became the moment when years of carefully hidden deception exploded in the most spectacular way imaginable. This isn't just a story about discovering my husband's affair, or even about exposing a manipulative woman who'd infiltrated our lives under false pretenses. This is the story of how a professional con artist's expertise in destroying families became the very weapon that ensured her own complete downfall. I'm 36 years old, the owner of Rosewood Artisan Studios, here in the affluent wine country community of Millbrook Valley, about 2 hours north of San Francisco. Until 6 months ago, I thought I understood exactly who I was, who my family was, and what my carefully crafted life represented. I was the woman who could transform raw clay into sculptures that sold in galleries across 3 states, the wife who supported her husband's political ambitions while building her own successful creative business, and the sister who'd stood by her younger brother through the darkest period of his life when a terrible accident changed everything for our family. My husband, Thomas Rosewood, had been Millbrook Valley's golden boy since we'd settled here 9 years ago. At 39, he possessed everything this exclusive community valued in a leader: old family money, an MBA from Stanford, steel gray eyes that commanded attention in every room, and the kind of natural charisma that made people automatically assume he could solve their problems and represent their interests. He'd built Rosewood Development Solutions from a small consulting firm into the region's premier land use and environmental planning company, specializing in helping wealthy clients navigate the complex regulations surrounding wine country development. More importantly for our current situation, Thomas had positioned himself as the inevitable next member of Millbrook Valley's City Council, with elections just 3 months away. Our Mediterranean-style estate on Vineyard Heights Drive was the kind of property that appeared in Architectural Digest, with terraced gardens I'd designed myself and an artist's studio that had become a destination for collectors from across California. It was the perfect backdrop for the political entertaining that had become central to our lives, the ideal setting for a power couple who seemed to have mastered the art of combining creative success with business acumen and political influence. But as I stood there watching Victoria Sterling work our fundraising crowd with professional expertise, every beautiful detail of our life felt like stage dressing for a performance that was about to end in devastating revelation. The woman who'd been attending our events for 7 months as Thomas's strategic communications consultant, the woman who'd offered me career advice and praised my artistic vision, the woman who'd seemed genuinely interested in our family's journey through Ethan's legal troubles and eventual rehabilitation, had been conducting an affair with my husband while simultaneously planning the systematic destruction of everything I'd worked to build. What made her betrayal infinitely worse than simple adultery was the connection I'd discovered between Victoria Sterling and the testimony that had sent Ethan to prison 5 years ago for vehicular manslaughter. The same woman who was now sleeping with my husband was the key witness, whose detailed, confident testimony had convinced a jury that my brother was guilty of reckless driving that resulted in the death of an innocent pedestrian named Caroline Wells. The same woman who had spent months positioning herself as the ideal consultant to help Thomas's political career was the person whose lies had destroyed Ethan's future and nearly torn our family apart. The same woman who'd sat at my dinner table offering sympathy for our family's struggles with the justice system was the architect of those very struggles. In exactly 17 minutes, Ethan would walk through that gate expecting to find family support and community acceptance as he continued rebuilding his life after serving his sentence. Instead, he would come face to face with the woman who'd helped ensure his conviction, the woman who'd been systematically destroying his sister's marriage while positioning herself to benefit from the political success that his imprisonment had ironically helped make possible. The stage was set, the players were in position, and in 16 minutes and counting, Victoria Sterling's perfectly constructed world of lies and manipulation would begin collapsing in the most public way possible. The woman who'd spent years perfecting the art of destroying other people's lives was about to discover that some families fight back with the same level of strategic precision she'd used against them. And it would all begin the moment my brother walked through that gate, and Victoria Sterling realized that her past had finally caught up with her present in the most devastating way she could never have anticipated. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. My name is Elena Rosewood, and if you've followed my work over the past decade, you know that I don't tell stories lightly. As the founder and creative director of Rosewood Artisan Studios, I've built my reputation on precision, attention to detail, and the ability to see beauty in raw materials that others might overlook. These same skills that allowed me to transform my small pottery hobby into a $1 million art business are exactly what enabled me to uncover a conspiracy so sophisticated that it had been operating against my family for years without detection. I'm 36 years old, originally from the small coastal town of Seaside Cove, California, where my parents owned a modest bed and breakfast that catered to weekend tourists seeking an escape from city life. My younger brother Ethan and I learned early that success required not just talent, but the kind of relentless work ethic that turns dreams into sustainable reality. When I received a full scholarship to study fine arts at UC Davis, I knew it was my opportunity to build something lasting, something that would provide security for myself and eventually help support my family. What started as weekend pottery classes during my junior year evolved into a genuine passion for sculptural ceramics. I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of how clay responds to pressure, how glazes interact with different firing temperatures, and most importantly, how to create pieces that spoke to collectors who were willing to pay premium prices for original work. By the time I graduated, I was already selling pieces to galleries in Sacramento and San Francisco, earning enough to cover my living expenses while building a portfolio that would eventually open doors I'd never imagined possible. The transition from struggling artist to successful entrepreneur happened gradually, then suddenly. 3 years after graduation, my sculptural series exploring themes of resilience and transformation caught the attention of Rebecca Chen, a prominent gallery owner in Napa Valley who specialized in contemporary works by emerging artists. Rebecca's endorsement led to my first major exhibition, which sold out completely within 2 weeks and established my reputation as someone whose work belonged in serious collections. But it was my decision to relocate to Millbrook Valley 9 years ago that really transformed both my career and my life. The wine country's community of affluent collectors, combined with the region's appreciation for artisanal craftsmanship, provided the perfect environment for expanding my studio and developing the kind of high-end clientele that could sustain a luxury art business. I purchased the property on Vineyard Heights Drive specifically because it included a converted barn that could accommodate large-scale installations and provide the natural light essential for detailed work. The success of Rosewood Artisan Studios exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Within 5 years, my pieces were being featured in galleries from Los Angeles to Seattle, and I'd developed a waiting list of collectors willing to commission custom works for their private estates. My annual revenue reached 7 figures, and I'd employed 6 other artists whose talents complemented my own vision while allowing me to take on larger, more complex projects. More importantly, the financial stability of my art business provided me with the resources and credibility to support my family during the most difficult period of our lives. When Ethan's legal troubles began 5 years ago, I was able to hire the best defense attorneys, cover court costs that reached into 6 figures, and maintain our family's dignity during a crisis that could have destroyed us financially as well as emotionally. My marriage to Thomas Rosewood had been built on what I believed was mutual respect for each other's professional achievements and shared vision for building something meaningful in Millbrook Valley. Thomas came from old California money. His grandfather had owned thousands of acres of vineyard land before selling to developers in the 1960s, but he'd chosen to build his own career rather than simply managing inherited wealth. When we met at a gallery opening in St. Helena 8 years ago, I was impressed by his combination of business acumen and genuine appreciation for art. Thomas's company, Rosewood Development Solutions, specialized in helping wealthy clients navigate the complex environmental and zoning regulations that govern development in California's wine country. His expertise was particularly valuable for clients who wanted to build custom estates, expand existing vineyards, or convert agricultural land for residential use while maintaining compliance with increasingly strict environmental protections. It was sophisticated work that required understanding both legal frameworks and local political dynamics. Our partnership had seemed ideal from both personal and professional perspectives. Thomas's established connections in Millbrook Valley's business and political communities complemented my growing reputation in the art world, creating a social network that benefited both our careers. His political ambitions were supported by my success as a creative entrepreneur, while my artistic credibility was enhanced by his business expertise and community standing. The property we'd purchased together reflected our combined success and shared aesthetic vision. The main house, a stunning Mediterranean revival with hand-painted tiles and custom ironwork, provided elegant spaces for the political entertaining that had become essential to Thomas's city council campaign. The converted studio barn allowed me to work on large-scale installations while hosting private viewings for collectors and potential clients. The terraced gardens, which I'd designed and maintained myself, showcased both my artistic eye and our commitment to environmental stewardship. For 7 years, our life in Millbrook Valley had represented everything I'd worked to achieve: financial independence through creative work, a marriage based on mutual support and shared goals, and the kind of community standing that comes from contributing meaningfully to local culture and politics. We'd weathered challenges together, including the devastating period of Ethan's trial and imprisonment, and I'd believed our bond had been strengthened by surviving that crisis as a united team. But as someone who'd spent years learning to see beneath surface appearances, to understand how pressure reveals the true nature of materials, I should have recognized the signs that the foundation of my marriage was developing cracks that would eventually prove catastrophic. The skills that made me successful as an artist, attention to detail, patience in developing complex projects, ability to work alone for extended periods, had perhaps made me less attentive to subtle changes in my personal relationships. Thomas's growing involvement in local politics had required more evening meetings, more weekend strategy sessions, and more time spent with consultants and advisors who weren't part of our established social circle. His explanation that political campaigns demanded this level of intensive planning had seemed reasonable, even admirable in its dedication to serving our community effectively. Victoria Sterling's introduction to our lives 7 months ago had appeared to be exactly what Thomas's campaign needed: a strategic communications expert with the sophistication and experience necessary to help a local candidate transition to elected office. Her credentials were impressive, her strategic insights were valuable, and her ability to understand both our community's unique dynamics and Thomas's particular strengths as a candidate had made her feel like an essential addition to our team. What I hadn't realized was that my years of focusing on building artistic success and supporting Thomas's political ambitions had made me vulnerable to exactly the kind of systematic deception that Victoria Sterling had spent her professional career perfecting. The woman I'd welcomed into our home, whose advice I'd sought about balancing creative work with political responsibilities, had been conducting surveillance on my marriage, my finances, and my family relationships with the same methodical precision I brought to creating art. But unlike clay, which reveals its flaws under pressure, Victoria Sterling had underestimated the resilience that comes from years of transforming raw materials into something beautiful and lasting. The same determination that had built my art business from nothing would soon be focused on exposing every lie she'd told and ensuring that her conspiracy against my family faced consequences as permanent as the sculptures in my gallery. Our life in Millbrook Valley represented the kind of success that most people only dream about achieving. The Mediterranean estate on Vineyard Heights Drive wasn't just a home. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when artistic vision combined with business strategy and genuine community investment. Every morning, I would wake up to panoramic views of rolling vineyards that stretched toward the distant mountains, knowing that everything I could see had been earned through years of disciplined work and careful planning. The main house itself was a masterpiece of architectural integration with the natural landscape. Thomas and I had spent 18 months working with renowned architect Patricia Mendoza to create spaces that honored both the region's Spanish colonial heritage and our contemporary lifestyle needs. Hand-painted Talavera tiles from Mexico adorned the kitchen backsplash, while custom ironwork throughout the property had been forged by local artisan Diego Ramirez, whose grandfather had worked on some of Napa Valley's most historic estates. The formal dining room could accommodate 24 guests comfortably, with French doors that opened onto terraced gardens, where I'd installed a series of sculptural fountains that became conversation pieces during our frequent dinner parties. The living spaces flowed seamlessly between indoor and outdoor areas, creating an environment where Thomas could conduct the kind of sophisticated political entertaining that had become essential to his city council campaign, while I could showcase my latest artistic projects to potential collectors and gallery representatives. But it was my converted studio barn that truly represented the heart of our shared vision for combining professional success with aesthetic excellence. The 40-foot ceilings provided space for large-scale installations, while north-facing windows offered the consistent natural light essential for detailed ceramic work. I'd invested over $200,000 in professional-grade kilns, pottery wheels, and glazing equipment that allowed me to create pieces rivaling anything produced in major metropolitan art centers. The studio had become a destination for serious collectors throughout Northern California. On any given weekend, I might host private viewings for clients like venture capitalist Jonathan Blake, who'd commissioned a series of garden sculptures for his Palo Alto estate, or tech entrepreneur Lisa Park, whose collection of contemporary ceramics had been featured in Architectural Digest. These relationships weren't just financially rewarding, they provided the kind of cultural credibility that elevated both my artistic reputation and our social standing within Millbrook Valley's elite community. Thomas's success with Rosewood Development Solutions had been equally impressive, though his achievements operated in a more behind-the-scenes capacity than my public art exhibitions. His client roster included some of California's wealthiest families, people who trusted him to navigate the incredibly complex regulatory environment surrounding wine country development. When Silicon Valley executives wanted to build sustainable vineyards on previously protected land, or when Hollywood producers sought to construct private estates that wouldn't violate environmental restrictions, they hired Thomas to make the impossible happen legally. His expertise extended beyond simple regulatory compliance into the realm of political strategy and relationship management. Thomas understood that successful development in California's wine country required not just legal knowledge, but also the ability to build consensus among environmental groups, local government officials, and community organizations that might otherwise oppose new construction. He'd perfected the art of crafting development proposals that satisfied multiple stakeholder groups while maximizing his clients' objectives. The financial rewards of his specialized practice allowed us to maintain a lifestyle that most couples our age couldn't imagine. Our combined annual income exceeded $2 million, with my art sales providing artistic credibility while his consulting fees ensured financial security and political connections. We traveled regularly to international art fairs and wine auctions, owned a beach house in Carmel that we used for weekend retreats, and had established investment portfolios that would eventually allow us to pursue philanthropic projects on a meaningful scale. More importantly, our success had given us the resources to support Ethan during the darkest period of his life. When he'd been arrested following the tragic accident that killed Caroline Wells, I'd been able to immediately hire criminal defense attorney Michael Harrison, whose reputation for handling complex vehicular manslaughter cases was unmatched in Northern California. The legal fees alone exceeded $300,000, but I'd never hesitated to spend whatever was necessary to ensure Ethan received the best possible representation. Our family's journey through Ethan's trial and subsequent imprisonment had actually strengthened Thomas's political credentials within Millbrook Valley's conservative community. Voters respected a man who'd stood by his wife during a family crisis, while maintaining his professional obligations and community commitments. Thomas had handled the situation with exactly the kind of dignified loyalty that local residents wanted to see in their elected officials, never attempting to distance himself from our family's troubles, while also never compromising his commitment to justice and accountability. The narrative that emerged from that difficult period had become central to Thomas's political identity. He was a leader who understood both personal responsibility and family loyalty, someone who could navigate complex moral terrain without abandoning his principles. His polling numbers reflected the community's appreciation for his handling of a situation that could have destroyed a less principled politician's career. Instead of becoming a liability, Ethan's case had demonstrated Thomas's character in ways that purely professional accomplishments couldn't match. Our social calendar reflected our position at the center of Millbrook Valley's cultural and political life. Tuesday evenings might find us hosting wine tastings for Thomas's campaign donors in our barrel-vaulted cellar, where I'd display rotating selections from my sculpture collection alongside bottles from the region's most prestigious vineyards. Thursday afternoons, I'd conduct studio tours for visiting collectors, many of whom would stay for dinner parties, where Thomas could discuss his vision for sustainable development and responsible governance. Weekend events were even more elaborate. Our annual harvest celebration had become one of the community's most anticipated social gatherings, combining my artistic exhibitions with Thomas's political networking in an environment that felt more like a cultural festival than a campaign event. Local musicians would perform on the terrace while guests sampled wines from neighboring vineyards and toured my latest installations. These events regularly attracted 300 guests, including mayors from surrounding communities, state legislators, prominent business leaders, and cultural figures whose presence elevated the entire region's profile. The success of these gatherings had established us as what local society columnist Jennifer Walsh described as Millbrook Valley's premier power couple, people whose combination of artistic achievement, business success, and political engagement represented the community's highest aspirations. Our marriage appeared to embody everything the region valued: creative excellence, entrepreneurial success, environmental stewardship, and commitment to public service. My relationship with Ethan had also become a source of community admiration. Rather than hiding from his legal troubles or minimizing my support for him during his incarceration, I'd been publicly vocal about the importance of rehabilitation and second chances. I'd spoken at criminal justice reform events, contributed to organizations supporting families affected by the legal system, and had even created a series of sculptures exploring themes of redemption and transformation that had been exhibited at galleries throughout California. This public advocacy had enhanced rather than damaged our social standing, positioning us as a family that understood both accountability and compassion. When Ethan completed his sentence and began rebuilding his life, our community had embraced his return as evidence of the kind of restorative justice that reflected Millbrook Valley's progressive values. His presence at our social events was seen as proof that people could overcome mistakes and contribute meaningfully to society when supported by strong family bonds and community acceptance. The life we'd built together represented more than just material success or social status. It was a carefully constructed foundation for the kind of long-term impact we wanted to have on our community and our respective fields. Thomas's political ambitions extended beyond city council to potential roles in county government or even state legislature, while my artistic career was positioned for major museum exhibitions and international recognition. Together, we'd created the kind of platform that could influence policy, culture, and social change on a scale that neither of us could have achieved individually. But success had also made us vulnerable in ways we'd failed to recognize. The very achievements that provided us with security and influence also made us attractive targets for people sophisticated enough to exploit our trust and manipulate our good intentions. The life we'd worked so hard to build had become the perfect stage for someone skilled in deception to perform the kind of long-term psychological manipulation that could destroy everything we'd accomplished while positioning herself to claim the benefits of our years of hard work. Victoria Sterling had studied every detail of our success, our relationships, our values, and our vulnerabilities, then positioned herself to systematically dismantle what we'd built, while making us grateful for the privilege of being destroyed. Victoria Sterling entered our lives like the answer to a prayer we hadn't even realized we were making. Thomas's campaign manager, Rebecca Torres, had been searching for weeks to find a strategic communications consultant with the specific expertise needed to help a local businessman transition successfully into elected office. The challenge wasn't just about traditional campaign messaging. Thomas needed someone who could navigate the unique dynamics of Millbrook Valley's sophisticated electorate, while positioning him as both an outsider reformer and an established community leader. When Rebecca first mentioned Victoria during a strategy meeting in our home office, her excitement was immediately apparent. "I've found someone extraordinary," she said, spreading Victoria's portfolio across Thomas's desk, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered buried treasure. "Her background is exactly what we need. boutique political consulting experience, expertise in wine country demographics, and a track record of helping business leaders successfully transition into public service. Victoria's credentials were indeed impressive. She held a master's degree in political communication from Georgetown University, had spent 4 years working for Meridian Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., and possessed a portfolio of successful campaigns that included 2 congressional races and a gubernatorial primary that had defied all polling predictions. More specifically for our situation, she'd spent the previous 18 months specializing in California wine country politics, helping candidates in Sonoma and Napa counties navigate the complex intersection of environmental concerns, economic development, and community preservation that defined local political discourse. But it was her personal background that made Victoria seem like a perfect fit for our particular circumstances. She'd grown up in a family business herself. Her parents had built a successful boutique winery in Oregon's Willamette Valley before selling to a national distributor who'd wanted access to their premium vineyard locations. She understood the emotional complexity of balancing family traditions with business growth, the challenges of maintaining community relationships during periods of rapid change, and the delicate art of preserving what mattered most while adapting to new opportunities. Our first meeting with Victoria took place on a Thursday evening in late February, during one of those perfect wine country sunsets that make everything seem more possible than it actually is. She arrived precisely on time, driving an understated silver Audi that suggested success without ostentation, dressed in a navy blazer and cream silk blouse that conveyed professionalism while respecting the relaxed elegance that characterized Millbrook Valley's social norms. From the moment Victoria walked into our living room, her presence commanded attention in a way that seemed effortless but was clearly the result of years of careful cultivation. She was 32 years old, with honey blonde hair styled in a sophisticated bob that framed intelligent green eyes and a warm smile that made everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. Her handshake was firm without being aggressive, her eye contact was direct without being intimidating, and her initial comments about our home's architecture and my sculptural pieces demonstrated both genuine appreciation and impressive cultural literacy. But it was Victoria's analysis of Thomas's political positioning that truly impressed both of us during that initial consultation. She didn't just understand campaign mechanics. She grasped the deeper psychological currents that drove voter behavior in communities like Millbrook Valley. She could articulate why certain demographic groups would respond to specific themes about sustainable development, while simultaneously explaining how to frame those same themes to appeal to voters with different priorities and concerns. "Your challenge isn't convincing people that you're qualified," Victoria explained, referring to notes she'd apparently prepared specifically for our meeting. "Your background in development consulting and your family's successful integration into this community already establish your credentials. The real opportunity is positioning you as someone who understands both preservation and progress, someone who can protect what residents love about Millbrook Valley while ensuring the community continues to thrive economically." Her strategic recommendations were sophisticated without being condescending, demonstrating both short-term tactical thinking and long-term vision. She proposed a campaign framework that would emphasize Thomas's unique combination of business expertise and environmental awareness, his ability to work with diverse stakeholder groups, and his commitment to transparent governance that respected community input while making necessary decisions efficiently. More importantly, Victoria seemed to genuinely understand the personal dynamics that would influence Thomas's effectiveness as an elected official. She asked thoughtful questions about how we managed the balance between his consulting business and campaign responsibilities, how we navigated the social expectations that came with political candidacy, and how we planned to maintain our family relationships and personal interests while serving in public office. Political spouses often feel like they're expected to sublimate their own professional identities, Victoria said to me directly, her voice carrying what seemed like genuine concern and understanding. "But your artistic career is actually one of Thomas's greatest assets. You represent the kind of creative and cultural leadership that attracts exactly the type of residents who make communities like this thrive. The key is integrating your success into the campaign narrative rather than treating it as separate from Thomas's political identity. Her insights about the intersection of art, politics, and community development were remarkably sophisticated. Victoria understood that my sculpture exhibitions and gallery connections provided access to influential collectors and cultural leaders throughout Northern California, people whose support could elevate Thomas's campaign beyond local politics into regional significance. She proposed ways to leverage my existing relationships while respecting the boundaries that protected my artistic credibility and professional independence. Victoria's approach to Ethan's situation was equally impressive in its nuanced understanding of both the political challenges and the human realities involved. Rather than suggesting we minimize or hide his criminal history, she recommended a strategy that would transform our family's experience with the justice system into one of Thomas's strongest qualifications for public service. Voters respect candidates who've faced real challenges and emerged with their principles intact, she explained during our second meeting the following week. Thomas's support for his family during a difficult period demonstrates exactly the kind of character and judgment that people want to see in their elected officials. The key is framing this experience as evidence of his ability to balance competing values, accountability and compassion, justice and redemption, rather than treating it as something to overcome or explain away. Her proposed messaging strategy would allow Thomas to speak authentically about the importance of both law enforcement and rehabilitation, themes that resonated strongly with Millbrook Valley's educated, progressive electorate. She'd researched similar cases in other communities and could demonstrate how candidates who'd handled family crises with dignity and transparency had actually strengthened their political standing by proving their character under pressure. Victoria's integration into our campaign team was gradual but thorough. She attended strategy meetings at our home office, participated in weekend planning sessions at local cafes, and even volunteered to help coordinate the logistics for Thomas's formal campaign announcement, which we'd scheduled for early April at the Millbrook Valley Community Center. Her organizational skills were exceptional, her political instincts were consistently accurate, and her ability to anticipate potential problems while developing proactive solutions made her feel indispensable within weeks of joining our team. More personally, Victoria's relationship with me began to evolve beyond simple professional courtesy into what felt like genuine friendship. She would arrive early for campaign meetings to admire new pieces in my studio, ask detailed questions about my artistic process and business development strategies, and share stories about her own challenges balancing professional ambition with personal relationships. She seemed particularly interested in how I'd maintained my individual identity while supporting Thomas's political aspirations, asking thoughtful questions that suggested both personal curiosity and professional insight. Our conversations during these informal moments revealed a woman who appeared to be genuinely thoughtful about the complexities of modern relationships and career development. Victoria shared concerns about finding the right balance between professional success and personal fulfillment, admitted to struggling with the pressure that came with managing high-stakes political campaigns, and even confided some of her own family history regarding her parents' difficult decision to sell their winery when market pressures made independent operation financially unsustainable. These personal revelations created a sense of intimacy and trust that made Victoria feel less like a hired consultant and more like a valued advisor whose insights extended far beyond campaign strategy. When she offered to help me prepare for an important gallery exhibition that coincided with Thomas's campaign launch, her assistance felt like the natural support of someone who genuinely cared about our family's success, rather than simply fulfilling professional obligations. By early April, Victoria Sterling had become integral to virtually every aspect of our political and social life. She attended our dinner parties, contributed to strategic planning sessions, and had even helped me negotiate a particularly complex commission from a collector whose political connections could benefit Thomas's campaign. Her presence at these events never felt intrusive or calculating. Instead, She seemed to enhance every gathering with her intelligence, wit, and ability to connect with people across different backgrounds and interests. The woman who'd appeared in our lives as a solution to Thomas's campaign needs had positioned herself as something far more valuable. A trusted advisor whose expertise extended into every area of our lives. Someone whose success had become intertwined with our own achievements in ways that made her feel like family, rather than hired help. Growing up in Seaside Cove, Ethan and I learned early that life could change irrevocably in a single moment. But nothing prepared our family for the devastating events that began on a fog-shrouded evening in downtown Ashmont 5 years ago. The tragedy that would ultimately test every relationship we'd built and every value we'd held sacred started as an ordinary Thursday night when my brother was driving home from his construction supervisor job at Redwood Heights Development, the same company where he'd worked his way up from basic carpentry to project management over 6 years of dedicated service. Ethan was 28 then, the kind of young man who'd inherited our parents' work ethic and genuine desire to build something meaningful with his hands. After completing his associate degree in construction management at Ashmont Community College, he'd thrown himself into learning every aspect of residential development, from foundation work to finish carpentry. His supervisors consistently praised his attention to detail, his ability to solve complex structural problems, and his skill at managing diverse work crews while maintaining both quality standards and project timelines. But Ethan had also inherited what our father diplomatically called the Rosewood social nature, a tendency to unwind after demanding workdays by joining his crew for drinks at Murphy's Tavern, the kind of working-class bar where construction workers, electricians, and plumbers gathered to complain about difficult clients, celebrate completed projects, and maintain the camaraderie that made physically demanding jobs more bearable. These sessions were never excessive, rarely extending past 2 beers, and typically involved more conversation than actual drinking. On the evening that changed everything, Ethan had stayed longer than usual at Murphy's because his crew was celebrating the completion of a particularly challenging renovation project that had required them to reinforce earthquake damage while preserving the historical integrity of a 1920s craftsman home. The client had been demanding, the timeline had been compressed, and the technical requirements had pushed everyone's skills to their limits. When they'd finally passed the final inspection that afternoon, the relief and pride had warranted what Ethan later described as, quote, maybe 1 beer more than I should have had. The accident occurred at 9:47 p.m. at the intersection of Main Street and Elm Avenue in downtown Ashmont, just 4 blocks from Ethan's apartment. Caroline Wells, a 61-year-old retired elementary school teacher, was crossing Main Street within the designated crosswalk when Ethan's pickup truck struck her at approximately 25 miles per hour. The impact threw Caroline 30 feet, causing massive internal injuries that proved fatal despite the heroic efforts of paramedics who arrived within 6 minutes of the collision. Ethan immediately stopped his vehicle, called 911, and remained at the scene providing whatever assistance he could until emergency responders arrived. Witnesses later testified that he appeared genuinely distraught, repeatedly asking if Carolyn was going to be okay and expressing horror at what had happened. When police administered a field sobriety test 40 minutes after the accident, Ethan's blood alcohol level measured 0.09%, just above California's legal limit of 0.08%, but well below levels typically associated with severe impairment. The criminal investigation that followed revealed a complex set of circumstances that defied simple categorization as either innocent accident or reckless criminal behavior. The weather conditions that evening included heavy fog that had reduced visibility to less than 50 feet in some areas. Carolyn Wells had been wearing dark clothing and had been partially obscured by a parked delivery truck that blocked Ethan's view of the crosswalk until the moment of impact. Accident reconstruction specialists determined that even a completely sober driver might not have been able to avoid the collision given the visibility conditions and the positioning of the parked vehicle. However, the district attorney's office, led by prosecutor David Hamilton, pursued vehicular manslaughter charges based on the argument that any amount of alcohol consumption before driving represented criminal negligence that had contributed to Caroline's death. Hamilton's case relied heavily on the legal principle that driving while intoxicated, even marginally, demonstrated such disregard for public safety that any resulting fatality constituted criminal behavior regardless of other contributing factors. The trial that consumed our family for 8 grueling months became a battleground between competing narratives about responsibility, accountability, and the role of alcohol in what might otherwise have been classified as a tragic accident. Ethan's defense attorney, Michael Harrison, argued that the fog, the poorly positioned delivery truck, and Caroline's dark clothing created conditions that made the collision unavoidable, while the minimal alcohol consumption played no meaningful role in causing the tragedy. But it was the prosecution's star witness who ultimately sealed Ethan's fate and introduced an element of certainty that overwhelmed the more nuanced factors surrounding the accident. Victoria Sterling, who testified that she'd been working late at the law firm of Patterson and Associates, located on the 3rd floor of a building overlooking the intersection, provided detailed and confident testimony about Ethan's driving behavior in the minutes before the collision. According to Victoria's testimony, she'd noticed Ethan's pickup truck approximately 3 blocks before the accident scene, driving in what she described as an, quote, erratic and aggressive manner. She testified that he'd been speeding significantly, had failed to come to complete stops at 2 intersections, and had been driving in a way that suggested obvious impairment. Most damagingly, she claimed to have observed Ethan accelerating rather than braking as he approached the crosswalk where Caroline was crossing, suggesting deliberate recklessness rather than an unavoidable accident. Victoria's testimony was devastating not only because of its content, but because of her credibility as a witness. She presented herself as a responsible professional who'd been working late on important legal documents when the tragic events unfolded outside her office window. Her description of the accident was detailed, consistent, and delivered with the kind of confident certainty that juries find compelling. She appeared to have no connection to either Ethan or Caroline Wells, no obvious motivation to lie, and no reason to embellish her observations. Under cross-examination, Victoria maintained her story with remarkable composure, providing additional details about the lighting conditions, the positioning of other vehicles, and her own vantage point that seemed to support her claims about having a clear view of the entire incident. When defense attorney Harrison challenged her ability to accurately assess vehicle speed from a 3rd-floor window, Victoria calmly explained that her father had been a traffic safety engineer and that she'd grown up learning to estimate vehicle speeds as a safety measure. The prosecution used Victoria's testimony to argue that Ethan's alcohol consumption had indeed contributed to the accident by impairing his judgment and reaction time in ways that turned a challenging driving situation into a criminal act. The combination of her detailed observations and confident presentation proved more persuasive to the jury than the complex technical arguments about fog density, vehicle positioning, and reaction times that formed the core of Ethan's defense. After deliberating for 3 days, the jury found Ethan guilty of vehicular manslaughter, accepting the prosecution's argument that his decision to drive after drinking, combined with the reckless behavior described by Victoria Sterling, demonstrated the kind of criminal negligence that warranted prison time. Judge Patricia Caldwell sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, noting that while she understood the tragic nature of the circumstances, the law required accountability for decisions that resulted in the loss of innocent life. The devastation that followed Ethan's conviction extended far beyond the obvious trauma of losing a family member to incarceration. The legal fees exhausted our family's savings, forcing my parents to mortgage their bed and breakfast and ultimately sell the property that had supported them for 20 years. The media coverage of the trial brought unwanted attention to my emerging art career, with some collectors questioning whether they wanted to be associated with an artist whose family had been involved in such a high-profile criminal case. More personally, the trial forced all of us to grapple with complex questions about guilt, responsibility, and justice that had no clear answers. Even those of us who believed in Ethan's fundamental decency struggled with the knowledge that his decision to drive after drinking had contributed to the death of an innocent woman who'd simply been trying to cross the street safely. The grief we felt for Caroline Wells's family was complicated by our anger at a justice system that seemed more interested in finding someone to blame than understanding the complex factors that had created an unavoidable tragedy. Thomas's support during this period had been unwavering and politically courageous. Rather than distancing himself from my family's legal troubles, he'd attended every day of the trial, helped coordinate Ethan's legal defense, and never once suggested that our relationship should be reconsidered in light of the negative publicity surrounding the case. His loyalty during our darkest period had convinced me that I'd married a man whose character could withstand any challenge, and whose commitment to our partnership transcended considerations of social status or political convenience. What none of us realized at the time was that Victoria Sterling's testimony had been far more than the honest recollections of a concerned citizen who'd witnessed a tragic accident. The woman who'd presented herself as a disinterested professional working late on legal documents had actually been conducting systematic surveillance of my brother as part of a larger operation whose scope and motivations we were only beginning to understand. The confident certainty with which she'd described Ethan's driving behavior hadn't come from careful observation, but from professional preparation designed to ensure his conviction, regardless of the actual circumstances surrounding Caroline Wells's death. The 7 months following Victoria's integration into our campaign team represented what I now recognize as a masterclass in long-term psychological manipulation. Her ability to enhance every aspect of our lives while systematically gathering intelligence about our vulnerabilities was so skillful that even now, knowing the truth, I find myself reluctantly admiring the sophistication of her operation. She didn't just infiltrate our professional and social circles. She made herself indispensable in ways that felt organic and mutually beneficial. Victoria's first major contribution came during Thomas's campaign announcement event at the Millbrook Valley Community Center in early April. What should have been a routine political gathering transformed into something resembling a cultural celebration under her strategic direction. She'd spent weeks studying the guest list, researching attendees' interests and concerns, and developing conversation topics that would allow Thomas to demonstrate both his policy knowledge and his genuine connection to community values. But her real genius lay in how she positioned my artistic career as an integral part of Thomas's political identity, rather than treating it as a separate achievement that happened to belong to his wife. Victoria arranged for several of my smaller sculptures to be displayed throughout the venue, creating natural conversation starters that allowed guests to appreciate both Thomas's policy positions and our family's cultural contributions. She'd even commissioned local musician Rachel Martinez to perform pieces that complemented the visual art, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a gallery opening than a political rally. The event's success exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Local media coverage emphasized Thomas's unique combination of business expertise and cultural sophistication, while several influential attendees made spontaneous contributions that put his campaign ahead of fundraising targets by nearly 40%. More importantly, Victoria's strategic planning had positioned us as the kind of couple that represented Millbrook Valley's aspirations for itself: successful, cultured, and committed to preserving what made the community special, while embracing thoughtful progress. Victoria's integration into our social life was equally strategic and seemingly effortless. She began attending our monthly dinner parties, initially as Thomas's campaign consultant, but gradually becoming someone whose presence enhanced every gathering. Her ability to connect with diverse groups of people was remarkable. She could discuss wine investment strategies with collector Harrison Blake, debate environmental policy with activist Sandra Chen, and share art market insights with gallery owner Patricia Mendoza, often within the same evening. What impressed me most was Victoria's apparent genuine interest in my work and her sophisticated understanding of the art business. During one particularly memorable evening in May, she'd spent over an hour discussing glazing techniques with ceramics expert Dr. James Park, demonstrating knowledge that seemed to come from years of serious study rather than casual curiosity. When I'd mentioned struggling with a technical challenge involving thermal expansion in large-scale installations, Victoria had suggested consulting with materials scientist Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, whose research at UC Davis had focused on exactly those issues. Her business insights were equally valuable. Victoria understood that my artistic success provided access to influential collectors and cultural leaders throughout Northern California, people whose support could elevate Thomas's campaign beyond local politics into regional significance. She proposed collaborative events that would leverage my existing relationships while respecting the boundaries that protected my artistic credibility and professional independence. The summer wine auction we organized at our estate in June became the template for this integrated approach. Victoria coordinated with auction house Meridian Fine Arts to showcase pieces from my latest sculpture series, alongside premium wines donated by neighboring vineyards. The event raised over $200,000 for local arts education programs, while introducing Thomas to philanthropists and cultural leaders who might not have otherwise engaged with his campaign. But it was her personal relationship with me that represented Victoria's most sophisticated manipulation. Our weekly lunch meetings, which had begun as campaign coordination sessions, evolved into conversations that felt like genuine friendship. Victoria shared stories about her challenging transition from East Coast political consulting to West Coast wine country culture, her thoughts about balancing professional ambition with personal relationships, and her observations about the unique pressures faced by women married to ambitious men. These conversations created a sense of intimacy and mutual support that made Victoria feel less like a hired consultant and more like a trusted confidant. When she'd confided her concerns about her own romantic relationship, apparently with a fellow political consultant named David Morrison, who traveled extensively and struggled to prioritize their relationship, I'd found myself offering advice and emotional support that deepened our apparent friendship. Victoria's insights about managing the complexities of supporting a spouse's political ambitions while maintaining individual professional identity seemed to come from genuine experience and careful observation. She understood the subtle pressures that came with public scrutiny, the challenge of appearing supportive without seeming subservient, and the importance of maintaining authentic relationships despite the strategic considerations that influenced every social interaction. During one particularly meaningful conversation in July, Victoria had expressed admiration for how I'd handled the public attention surrounding Ethan's case and his subsequent reintegration into our community. "You managed to support your family while maintaining your own credibility," she'd said, her voice carrying what seemed like genuine respect. "That takes real strength and intelligence. Most people either abandon family members during crises or compromise their own standing by appearing to excuse serious mistakes." Her apparent understanding of our family's journey through Ethan's legal troubles felt especially significant, because she seemed to grasp the complex emotions involved without offering simplistic judgments or false reassurances. Victoria acknowledged the tragedy of Caroline Wells's death while recognizing the importance of redemption and second chances. She'd even suggested ways that Thomas's campaign could address criminal justice reform issues that resonated with voters who'd been touched by similar experiences. Victoria's professional contributions during this period were equally impressive. Her media strategy positioned Thomas as a thoughtful policymaker who understood both business development and environmental preservation. Her fundraising efforts connected us with donors whose support provided financial security while expanding our network of influential relationships. Her event planning transformed routine campaign gatherings into memorable experiences that reinforced Thomas's image as a leader who could bring diverse community groups together around shared values. But perhaps most importantly, Victoria's presence seemed to bring out the best in both Thomas and me. Her strategic insights challenged Thomas to articulate his vision more clearly, while her cultural knowledge helped me identify new opportunities for artistic growth and community engagement. Conversations at our dinner table became more stimulating, our social events became more successful, and our relationship as a couple seemed to benefit from having someone whose intelligence and sophistication matched our own ambitions. The collaborative dynamic between Victoria, Thomas, and me felt like the kind of professional partnership that could achieve significant long-term impact. Her expertise in political strategy, combined with Thomas's business knowledge and my cultural connections, created possibilities for influence and achievement that none of us could have realized individually. We'd begun discussing potential projects that extended beyond Thomas's city council campaign toward longer-term objectives involving regional development policy and arts education initiatives. By late summer, Victoria had become integral to virtually every aspect of our lives. She attended family gatherings where Ethan was present, contributing to conversations about his career plans and community reintegration with sensitivity and genuine encouragement. She participated in strategic planning sessions for my upcoming gallery exhibition in San Francisco, offering insights about collector psychology and market positioning that proved invaluable for negotiations with potential buyers. Her relationship with our broader social circle had also deepened significantly. Other couples in our community had begun including Victoria in their own gatherings, recognizing her as someone whose intelligence and cultural sophistication enhanced any social event. She developed particularly close friendships with several influential women, including City Council member Jennifer Walsh and nonprofit director Dr. Amanda Foster, relationships that provided both social fulfillment and strategic value for Thomas's political objectives. The trust we developed in Victoria extended to financial and legal matters as well. When I'd needed advice about contract negotiations for a major commission, Victoria had recommended attorney Michael Chen, whose expertise in intellectual property law had protected my interests in ways that saved both money and potential future complications. When Thomas had considered expanding his consulting practice to include clients in Oregon and Washington, Victoria's insights about interstate business regulations had informed strategic decisions that positioned him for successful growth. Looking back now, I understand that every moment of apparent friendship, every piece of valuable advice, every contribution to our success had been carefully calculated to deepen our dependence on Victoria, while gathering intelligence that would later be used against us. The woman who seemed to enhance every aspect of our lives had actually been conducting systematic reconnaissance, identifying our strengths and weaknesses, with the patience and precision of someone whose ultimate objective was our complete destruction. But at the time, Victoria Sterling felt like the kind of person we'd been waiting our entire lives to meet. Someone whose intelligence matched our own, whose values aligned with our principles, and whose success was genuinely intertwined with our achievements in ways that created lasting mutual benefit. She'd positioned herself not just as Thomas's campaign consultant or my business advisor, but as the missing element that could help us achieve the kind of influence and impact we'd always believed was possible. The first inconsistency in Victoria's carefully constructed persona emerged during what should have been a routine conversation about wine pairings at Judge Harrison Caldwell's anniversary celebration in early September. Victoria had been describing an supposedly memorable evening at Domaine de la Romanée Conti in Burgundy, painting vivid details about the autumn harvest atmosphere, and her tasting of their legendary Pinot Noir vintages that had supposedly inspired her deep appreciation for terroir-driven winemaking. Her description was remarkably detailed, including specific observations about the estate's ancient cellars, the winemaker's philosophy regarding biodynamic farming practices, and even the particular characteristics of the 2018 vintage that had apparently paired beautifully with the estate's signature coq au vin. She spoke with the kind of passionate precision that suggested not just a casual visit, but a transformative experience that had shaped her understanding of wine as both art and agriculture. But when prominent collector Dr. James Park mentioned that he'd visited the same estate during the exact time period Victoria had described, her story began to unravel in subtle but unmistakable ways. Dr. Park's questions about specific details, the name of the vineyard manager who'd conducted their tour, the particular tasting room where they'd sampled the reserve wines, the local restaurant where she'd supposedly enjoyed that memorable dinner, revealed gaps in Victoria's knowledge that should have been impossible if her experience had been genuine. More troubling were the direct contradictions that emerged as their conversation continued. Victoria had described the estate's tasting room as featuring ancient stone walls and traditional wooden casks, while Dr. Park recalled a modern facility with temperature-controlled steel tanks and contemporary architectural details. When he mentioned the estate's renowned rosé program, Victoria had nodded knowingly and offered comments about their rosé production methods. Apparently unaware that Domaine de la Romane Conti had never produced rosé wines in their entire history. These inconsistencies might have been dismissed as simple confusion between different vineyard visits, but they triggered the same mental alert system that had made me successful in evaluating potential clients and business partners. In my experience, people who fabricated sophisticated experiences often revealed themselves through exactly these kinds of contradictions. They could construct convincing general narratives but struggled with specific details that would be impossible to forget if the experiences had actually occurred. The second red flag appeared 2 weeks later during a campaign strategy session focused on Thomas's position regarding affordable housing development in Millbrook Valley. Victoria had been presenting research data about similar initiatives in other California wine country communities, citing specific statistics about housing costs, demographic impacts, and voter response patterns that seemed to demonstrate comprehensive knowledge of regional political trends. Her analysis was impressive in its scope and sophistication, incorporating data from Sonoma County housing initiatives, Napa Valley workforce development programs, and even comparable situations in Oregon wine regions that had faced similar growth pressures. She'd prepared detailed charts showing correlation patterns between housing policy and voter behavior, referencing academic studies and policy papers that suggested months of careful research. But when Thomas mentioned that he'd actually consulted on one of the Sonoma County projects she'd referenced, a mixed-income development in Healdsburg that had been completed 18 months earlier, Victoria's confident expertise suddenly became much less certain. The project details she'd cited didn't match Thomas's recollections of the actual development timeline, community response, or final outcome metrics. More specifically, Victoria had described the Healdsburg project as a successful model that had received broad community support and achieved its affordable housing targets ahead of schedule. Thomas remembered a much more complicated reality, involving significant community opposition, construction delays that had pushed completion back by nearly a year, and ongoing disputes about parking and traffic impacts that had made the project politically controversial rather than successful. When Thomas gently corrected these inaccuracies, Victoria quickly attributed the discrepancies to her confusion between multiple similar projects she'd been researching simultaneously. Her explanation was plausible enough to prevent awkward questions, but it represented a pattern of expertise that seemed broad but shallow, comprehensive in scope but unreliable in specifics. The third incident was more difficult to rationalize away and involved Victoria's claimed educational background at Georgetown University. During a fundraising dinner at our home in late September, several guests who were Georgetown alumni had been discussing recent changes to the university's political communication program when Victoria joined their conversation with apparent enthusiasm about reconnecting with fellow graduates. Her initial contributions to the discussion seemed knowledgeable and authentic. She referenced specific professors, described campus traditions, and shared anecdotes about student life that resonated with other alumni present. But as the conversation became more detailed, focusing on particular faculty members and program changes that had occurred during the time when Victoria would have been completing her graduate studies, her responses became increasingly vague and nonspecific. Most telling was her reaction when alumna Dr. Sarah Foster mentioned Professor Elizabeth Hartwell, who had apparently been a legendary figure in the political communication department during Victoria's supposed time at Georgetown. Instead of the immediate recognition and shared memories that should have accompanied mention of such a prominent faculty member, Victoria looked momentarily blank, before offering a generic comment about having taken so many classes that individual professors sometimes blurred together in her memory. The excuse was reasonable enough in isolation, but it followed the same pattern I'd begun to notice. Victoria's expertise seemed to evaporate when confronted with specific details that should have been impossible to forget if her claimed experiences had been genuine. A graduate student wouldn't forget a legendary professor in their field any more than I would forget my most influential art instructors at UC Davis. Even more concerning was Victoria's apparent discomfort with the direction of the conversation. Rather than embracing the opportunity to reminisce with fellow alumni or share specific memories that would have strengthened her connection to the group, she quickly steered the discussion toward more recent political developments that didn't require personal recollections of university experiences. The fourth red flag involved Victoria's claimed relationship with David Morrison, the fellow political consultant she'd mentioned during our personal conversations throughout the summer. According to Victoria, David worked primarily on East Coast campaigns, but traveled frequently to California for clients who needed expertise in cross-regional political strategy. She'd shared what seemed like intimate details about their relationship challenges, including his tendency to prioritize work over personal commitments, and her frustration with maintaining emotional connection despite their demanding travel schedules. But when I'd mentioned David's name to Rebecca Torres during a casual conversation about political consulting networks, Rebecca's response had been immediate and definitive. She'd never heard of any consultant named David Morrison working in either East Coast or West Coast political circles. Given Rebecca's extensive connections throughout the industry and her comprehensive knowledge of major consulting firms and independent practitioners, her unfamiliarity with someone of David's supposed prominence and client base seemed impossible if he actually existed. More troubling was Victoria's reaction when I'd casually mentioned Rebecca's unfamiliarity with David's work during one of our lunch meetings. Instead of offering to connect them or expressing surprise that Rebecca hadn't encountered David despite their overlapping professional networks, Victoria had quickly explained that David worked primarily with clients who valued discretion and rarely participated in industry conferences or professional organizations that would have brought him to Rebecca's attention. The explanation was plausible but convenient, another example of Victoria providing just enough detail to prevent direct verification while avoiding the kind of specific information that could be independently confirmed or contradicted. Most significantly, I'd begun noticing changes in Thomas's behavior that seemed to correspond with Victoria's increasing presence in our lives. His schedule had become increasingly unpredictable, with evening campaign meetings that seemed to run much later than necessary, and weekend strategy sessions that apparently required privacy and couldn't accommodate my presence even in a supportive capacity. When I'd offered to prepare dinner for one of these extended planning sessions, Thomas had quickly declined, explaining that Victoria preferred to work without distractions, and that my presence, however welcome, might disrupt their concentration and strategic focus. The explanation was considerate and professionally reasonable, but it represented a departure from our established pattern of collaborative campaign planning that had characterized the early months of his political preparation. Thomas had also begun taking phone calls in his car rather than in his home office, claiming that Victoria had recommended additional security precautions given the competitive nature of local politics and the possibility that rivals might attempt to gather intelligence about his campaign strategies. The paranoia seemed excessive for a city council race in a community of 15,000 people, but Thomas had been adamant that successful politicians needed to assume their communications were being monitored. His new commitment to operational security had meant that I was increasingly excluded from conversations about campaign strategy, despite having been intimately involved in the planning and development during the initial months of his political preparation. The man who'd once sought my advice on major decisions was now presenting me with conclusions that had apparently been reached through discussions I wasn't qualified to witness. Most concerning was Thomas's growing criticism of aspects of our domestic life that had never previously been sources of tension. He'd begun making offhand comments about my meal planning being too predictable, suggesting that we should explore more sophisticated dining options when entertaining important campaign supporters. When I'd proposed hosting a dinner party for major donors, Thomas had suggested that Victoria might be better positioned to handle the planning given her professional experience with high-stakes political entertaining. These comments were delivered without malice, framed as practical suggestions rather than personal criticisms, but they represented a fundamental shift in how Thomas viewed my contributions to our shared life and political objectives. The woman who'd successfully managed dozens of elaborate social events throughout our marriage was suddenly being portrayed as inadequate for the demands of political entertaining, despite having demonstrated those exact skills countless times over the previous years. The cumulative effect of these seemingly minor inconsistencies and behavioral changes created a growing sense of unease that I couldn't quite articulate or justify through rational analysis. Each individual incident could be explained away through reasonable alternative interpretations, but together they formed a pattern that suggested something fundamental had shifted in both Victoria's presentation of herself and Thomas's relationship with our marriage. The moment that shattered my willful denial came on a Tuesday morning when I was least prepared for life-altering revelations. I'd been battling a persistent case of sinusitis for 3 days, the kind of illness that left me feeling disconnected and foggy but not quite sick enough to justify canceling all my professional obligations. Thomas had left early for what he described as a breakfast meeting with potential campaign donors in Sacramento, and I'd planned to spend the morning working on glazing formulations for my upcoming San Francisco gallery exhibition while nursing herbal tea and decongestants. Around 11:30, I realized I'd left my portfolio of gallery contract revisions in Thomas's Mercedes from the previous evening when we'd returned from a campaign event at the Millbrook Valley Country Club. The documents contained detailed specifications for installation requirements and insurance provisions that I needed to review before my afternoon conference call with gallery director Patricia Mendoza, and I couldn't afford to wait until Thomas returned that evening to retrieve them. Using my spare key, I went to his car to collect the leather portfolio from the passenger seat where I'd placed it the night before. The documents were exactly where I'd left them, but as I gathered the papers, my elbow accidentally activated the button that opened the center console compartment between the front seats. Inside, nestled among breath mints and phone charging cables, was a device I'd never seen before. An older model iPhone with a cracked screen protector, clearly not Thomas's primary phone, displaying several unread text message notifications. My first instinct was to close the console and respect the privacy boundaries that had been fundamental to our marriage, but the phone buzzed with another incoming message as I hesitated, and the preview notification was visible enough that I could see it began with, "Missing you already, darling." The rational part of my mind offered innocent explanations, even as my hands trembled while picking up the device. Perhaps it was an old phone he'd kept for backup purposes. Or maybe it was related to campaign security measures that Victoria had recommended. The messages might be routine political communications that used affectionate language as some kind of code for sensitive information that couldn't be transmitted through normal channels. But when I opened the text thread labeled simply V, the messages that appeared on the screen destroyed every rational explanation and replaced them with a reality so devastating that I had to grip the car door frame to remain standing. The conversation history revealed months of intimate exchanges between my husband and Victoria Sterling, messages that documented not just a physical affair but an emotional relationship that had apparently become the center of both their lives. "Last night was incredible," read one message from Victoria sent just 2 days prior. "Watching you work that crowd at the country club while knowing I was the only one who understood what you were really thinking made it impossible to concentrate on anything except getting you alone afterward. I keep replaying that moment in the coat closet when you whispered what you wanted to do to me." Thomas's response had been equally revealing. Every campaign event where I have to maintain professional distance while watching you charm other people is becoming torture. 3 more weeks until the election, and then we can finally stop hiding. I've already started researching divorce attorneys who specialize in protecting assets during political campaigns. The thread contained hundreds of similar messages spanning back nearly 6 months, documenting the evolution of their relationship from what appeared to be initial attraction through the development of a full-blown affair that included detailed planning for a future together after Thomas's election victory. They discussed specific hotels where they'd met during supposed campaign strategy sessions, restaurants where they'd shared intimate dinners while I believed Thomas was attending donor meetings, and even vacation destinations they planned to visit together once their relationship could be made public. More devastating than the evidence of physical infidelity were the emotional intimacies revealed in their exchanges. Victoria had shared details about her childhood, her career ambitions, and her thoughts about marriage and family that indicated a level of vulnerability and trust that I'd believed was reserved for my relationship with Thomas. Meanwhile, Thomas had confided frustrations about our marriage, complaints about my personality traits, and criticisms of our relationship dynamics that he'd never expressed directly to me. Sometimes I feel like Elena sees me as a project to be managed rather than a man to be desired, he'd written in one particularly cruel message. She's so focused on controlling every detail of our public image that she's lost sight of what made me fall in love with her in the first place. With you, I feel like the person I'm supposed to be, instead of the husband I'm expected to be. Victoria's response had been equally devastating. You deserve someone who appreciates your ambition instead of trying to contain it. Elena's need to micromanage everything probably worked when you were building your consulting business. But political leadership requires a different kind of partner. Someone who can enhance your public image instead of limiting it with all her artistic pretensions and family drama. As I scrolled through months of messages, a more sinister pattern began to emerge beyond the typical selfishness of an extramarital affair. Victoria had been systematically gathering information about our personal finances, our family relationships, and even details about Ethan's parole conditions and rehabilitation progress. She'd asked seemingly innocent questions about my business clients, our property investments, and Thomas's long-term political ambitions that had apparently been designed to assess the complete scope of what she would gain by replacing me in his life. Most chilling were the messages where she discussed strategies for undermining my relationship with Thomas's political allies, and gradually positioning herself as a more suitable partner for his career advancement. She'd identified specific weaknesses in my public speaking abilities, analyzed my fashion choices at campaign events, and even critiqued my social media presence as too focused on professional achievements and not supportive enough of Thomas's political brand. I think Elena is starting to suspect something, Victoria had written in a message sent just 4 days ago. She was asking very specific questions about my Georgetown background at the Foster dinner, and she's been watching our interactions more carefully during public events. We might need to accelerate our timeline for going public. Thomas's response had been immediate. How much does she know? Can we contain this until after the election? I can't afford a scandal right now, not when the polls show me ahead by 12 points. I don't think she knows about us specifically, but she's definitely noticed inconsistencies in my biographical details, Victoria had replied. The problem is that Elena has those obsessive attention to detail tendencies that make her dangerous when she starts investigating something. We need to be more careful about maintaining distance in public, and I think I should stop attending events at your house for a while. That might actually make things worse, Thomas had responded. If you suddenly become less available, she'll definitely know something is wrong. Maybe we should consider telling her after the election. By then, my political position will be secure enough that a divorce won't destroy everything we've worked for. Thomas, we can't wait that long, Victoria had written back. I've been researching the divorce laws in California, and if she files before you're elected, she could potentially claim a significant portion of your future political earnings and pension benefits. But if we wait until you're in office and then initiate the divorce ourselves, we can control the narrative and minimize the financial damage. The cold calculation in their discussion of destroying my life while protecting their own interests was breathtaking in its selfishness. They weren't just conducting an affair, they were planning the systematic dismantling of my marriage, my financial security, and my place in the community we'd built together, all while ensuring that their betrayal would cause me maximum damage while providing them with maximum benefit. But it was the final exchange in the message thread that transformed my shock and hurt into something much more dangerous. The kind of cold, calculating fury that comes from realizing you've been systematically betrayed by people who'd underestimated your intelligence and determination. The conversation had taken place just yesterday, apparently after Victoria had attended what I'd believed was a routine campaign strategy meeting. I found something interesting while researching Elena's business connections, Victoria had written. Did you know that one of her major collectors, Dr. James Park, was also one of the character witnesses who testified on behalf of her brother during his trial? Small world, isn't it? Thomas's response had been confused. What does that have to do with anything? Elena knows lots of people through her art business. Maybe nothing, Victoria had replied, but it got me thinking about that whole vehicular manslaughter case. I was actually working in California during that time period, doing opposition research for various political campaigns. The trial received quite a bit of local media attention because of the circumstances involved. You were here 5 years ago? Thomas had asked. I thought you'd moved to California from D.C. just last year. I've been working California campaigns longer than I mentioned on my resume, Victoria had responded. Sometimes it's better to keep your full professional history private, especially when it involves sensitive research work that some clients prefer to keep confidential. As I read those final messages, a terrible possibility began forming in my mind. Victoria's presence in California 5 years ago, her expertise in opposition research, her detailed knowledge of our family's background and vulnerabilities. What if her connection to our lives extended far beyond her relationship with Thomas? What if her infiltration of our marriage was part of a longer-term operation that had begun during the darkest period of our family's history? After photographing every message on Thomas's secret phone and carefully returning it to exactly the position where I'd found it, I drove home with my mind racing through implications that seemed too sinister to be real. But as an artist who'd spent years learning to see patterns and connections that others missed, I couldn't ignore the possibility that Victoria Sterling's presence in our lives represented something far more calculated and dangerous than a simple affair. The woman who'd positioned herself as the solution to Thomas's campaign needs might actually be the architect of a conspiracy that had been targeting our family for years. And if that was true, then everything we'd endured, Ethan's conviction, our family's financial devastation, even Thomas's political success that had made him attractive to someone like Victoria, might have been orchestrated by the same person who was now systematically destroying my marriage while planning to steal everything I'd worked to build. The plan Michael Harrison and I developed over the next 72 hours was designed to serve multiple objectives simultaneously: exposing Victoria's current crimes, gathering evidence about her past misconduct, and ensuring that the unknown parties who'd commissioned her surveillance of our family faced accountability for years of systematic destruction. Most importantly, we wanted to orchestrate the revelation in a way that would provide Ethan with the public vindication he deserved while destroying Victoria's ability to harm other families in the future. The centerpiece of our strategy would be the fundraising reception Thomas had scheduled for Saturday afternoon at our estate, an event that Victoria believed would mark another milestone in his journey toward electoral victory. She had no idea that the gathering would instead become the stage for her complete exposure and the beginning of legal consequences that would end both her professional career and her personal freedom. Michael had already filed sealed court documents requesting that Ethan's case be reviewed for prosecutorial misconduct, creating a legal framework for investigating Victoria's perjured testimony without alerting her to our current knowledge. Meanwhile, I'd installed sophisticated recording equipment throughout our property that would capture both audio and video evidence of any interactions between Victoria and the guests, ensuring that her admissions and reactions would be preserved for use in criminal proceedings. Most crucially, we'd coordinated Ethan's arrival to coincide with the peak of the party's social activity, when maximum witnesses would be present to verify what transpired and ensure that news of the revelations spread throughout our community immediately. Ethan had spent Thursday afternoon being briefed about Victoria's true identity and her role in his wrongful conviction, preparation that allowed him to maintain composure during their inevitable confrontation, while providing the emotional impact that would demonstrate to witnesses the human cost of her professional activities. Saturday arrived with perfect October weather that seemed designed for outdoor entertaining. As I arranged the final details for what Thomas believed was a routine political gathering, every element of the day felt charged with significance that only I fully understood. The elegant tent we'd erected on the back terrace, the catering tables positioned to encourage natural circulation among guests, and the sound system that would soon broadcast Victoria's own words as evidence of her crimes. Everything was positioned to maximize the impact of revelations that would destroy her carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation. Thomas had spent Friday evening reviewing his campaign speech and strategizing about which donors to prioritize for deeper conversations, completely unaware that his political career was scheduled to end approximately 3 hours after the first guests arrived. His excitement about the event was genuine and touching in its naivete. He truly believed this fundraiser would mark a significant milestone in his journey toward electoral victory. The guest list I'd carefully curated included several key figures whose presence would ensure maximum impact when the truth emerged. Judge Harrison Caldwell would provide legal authority to any criminal allegations. Campaign manager Rebecca Torres would serve as witness to the professional misconduct that had corrupted Thomas's entire political operation. And most importantly, Ethan's parole officer Sandra Martinez would be present to verify his character and rehabilitation progress when Victoria's role in his wrongful conviction was exposed. The first 2 hours of the party unfolded exactly as planned, with guests mingling naturally throughout the garden, while Victoria and Thomas worked the crowd with practiced political charm. I watched from my position near the beverage station as Victoria demonstrated her expertise in social manipulation, moving effortlessly between conversations with donors, remembering personal details about their businesses and families, and subtly reinforcing Thomas's qualifications for city council through carefully planted comments and strategic questions. Her performance was flawless, the result of months of preparation and years of professional training in reading people and exploiting their psychological vulnerabilities. She complimented Judge Caldwell's recent judicial decisions while seamlessly transitioning into discussion about Thomas's vision for criminal justice reform. She engaged Dr. Patricia Mendoza in conversation about arts funding, while positioning Thomas as someone who understood the economic value of cultural programs. Every interaction served dual purposes, advancing Thomas's political interests while gathering intelligence about potential allies and opponents. But at exactly 4:15, as Victoria was explaining Thomas's environmental policies to a group of local business owners, I saw her attention shift toward the garden gate, where a familiar figure was approaching through the crowd of guests. Ethan walked through the entrance with the relaxed confidence we'd rehearsed, wearing a navy blazer and khaki pants that made him look like any other young professional attending a political fundraiser. Victoria's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The color drained from her face as she recognized the man whose life she'd helped destroy 5 years ago, and her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand as the full implications of his presence began to register. She glanced quickly around the crowd as if calculating escape routes or assessing whether anyone else had noticed her distress. I moved quickly toward the sound system we'd installed for Thomas's campaign speech and activated the microphone that would ensure every guest could hear what followed. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying across the garden with crystal clarity, "I need your attention for a few minutes. There's something about this campaign and about some of the people involved in it that you need to know." The crowd turned toward me with the kind of focused attention that political gatherings rarely achieved. Thomas's face showed growing alarm as he realized that whatever was happening was far outside the script he'd anticipated for the day. 5 years ago, I continued, my brother Ethan was convicted of vehicular manslaughter, based largely on the testimony of an eyewitness who claimed to have observed his driving behavior on the night of a tragic accident that killed an innocent woman named Caroline Wells. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his presence lending weight to my words. Around the garden, guests were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than routine political entertainment. That eyewitness, I said, letting my gaze settle on Victoria's terrified face, was Victoria Sterling. But what she didn't tell the court, what she didn't tell Ethan's defense attorney, and what she certainly didn't tell any of us, was that her presence that night wasn't coincidental. She was conducting professional surveillance on my brother as part of an intelligence operation commissioned by parties unknown. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force. I could see shock, confusion, and growing understanding ripple through the gathering as people processed the implications of what they were hearing. Victoria's face had gone completely white, and her hands were visibly shaking as she realized that her carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. But that's not all, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I delivered the evidence that would destroy not just Victoria's credibility, but Thomas's political future as well. For the past 7 months, while serving as my husband's campaign consultant, Victoria has been conducting an affair with Thomas that they believed would remain secret until after the election. I activated the recording system that would broadcast their own words as the final irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy. Victoria's voice, captured just days earlier during what she'd believed was a private conversation with Thomas, echoed across the stunned crowd. I've been researching the divorce laws in California, and if she files before you're elected, she could potentially claim a significant portion of your future political earnings. But if we wait until you're in office and then initiate the divorce ourselves, we can control the narrative and minimize the financial damage. Thomas's response followed immediately. By then, my political position will be secure enough that a divorce won't destroy everything we've worked for. The words hung in the air like poison, each syllable destroying not just his political career but his reputation as a man of integrity and family values. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. I could see disgust, betrayal, and anger in the faces of people who'd trusted him with their support and their contributions. But it was Ethan's quiet statement that provided the final, devastating blow to Victoria's credibility. Ladies and gentlemen, this woman's perjured testimony sent me to prison for 5 years for a crime that was far more complicated than anyone understood at the time. Her presence in our community, her infiltration of my family's life, and her systematic destruction of my sister's marriage are all part of a professional operation that has been targeting our family for years. Victoria made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Those recordings are taken out of context," she said, her voice rising with panic. "This is obviously some kind of setup designed to what?" Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting through her protestations with quiet authority. "To expose the truth about what you did to me 5 years ago, to reveal that your entire presence in this community has been based on lies and professional misconduct." Judge Caldwell stepped forward, his legal training taking precedence over social courtesy. "Miss Sterling, if what's being alleged here is accurate, you may have committed perjury in a criminal proceeding that resulted in wrongful imprisonment. I strongly advise you to contact an attorney before making any further statements." But Victoria's professional composure had finally cracked completely. Years of maintaining false identities, manipulating emotions, and orchestrating deceptions had created psychological pressure that erupted when her carefully constructed world collapsed in public. "You don't understand," she said desperately, her voice becoming shrill. "I was following orders. The surveillance was legitimate. Ethan Rosewood's family was flagged as requiring investigation because of their potential connections to—" She stopped abruptly, realizing that she was revealing information that could implicate her employers and expose the full scope of the conspiracy that had targeted our family. But the damage was done. Her admission that the surveillance had been legitimate and ordered confirmed that Ethan's conviction had been based on professional deception rather than honest witness testimony. Within minutes, the legal consequences began cascading. Michael Harrison, who'd been monitoring the situation from a discreet position, approached with law enforcement officers who'd been standing by to make arrests once we'd gathered sufficient evidence. "Victoria Sterling," he announced, "you're under arrest for perjury, conspiracy, and fraud." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, the full scope of her operation began to unravel. Her arrest triggered federal investigations that ultimately revealed a network of intelligence operatives who'd been systematically targeting families throughout California for wealthy clients who wanted comprehensive background information on business rivals, political enemies, or potential threats to their interests. The investigation that followed exposed not just Victoria's crimes, but the identities of the parties who'd commissioned her surveillance of our family years earlier. Thomas's former business partner, Richard Blackstone, had hired Blackwater Investigations to gather compromising information about our family when Ethan had discovered environmental violations at one of Blackstone's development projects. Rather than address the legitimate concerns Ethan had raised, Blackstone had chosen to destroy his credibility through systematic surveillance and manipulation of the legal system. Ethan's conviction was officially overturned within 6 weeks, and he received a formal apology from the state of California for the wrongful imprisonment he'd endured. Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for perjury, conspiracy, and violation of racketeering statutes. Richard Blackstone faced criminal charges for commissioning the illegal surveillance and was ordered to pay substantial damages to our family. As for Thomas, his political career ended the moment those recordings played at our fundraising reception. He withdrew from the city council race within days, and our divorce was finalized within 6 months with a settlement that reflected his reduced circumstances and complete lack of bargaining power given the documented evidence of his misconduct. Today, as I sit in my redesigned studio creating art that explores themes of justice, resilience, and the power of truth to overcome deception, I understand that some betrayals are actually opportunities in disguise. The experience taught me that the most dangerous opponents aren't those who seem obviously threatening. They're the ones who make themselves indispensable while systematically destroying everything you've worked to build. But I also learned that patience, intelligence, and strategic thinking can turn even the most sophisticated conspiracy against itself. Victoria Sterling had spent years perfecting the art of infiltrating and destroying families, but she'd made the fatal mistake of targeting people who refused to be destroyed quietly. Sometimes justice isn't swift, but when it's properly orchestrated, it can be absolutely perfect. And sometimes the people who spend their lives hunting others discover too late that they've become the prey in someone else's carefully planned operation. The woman who walked into my garden that Saturday afternoon believing she'd won had underestimated the power of a family that stands together against those who would tear them apart. Her confidence in her own cleverness had blinded her to the possibility that some targets possessed the determination and resources to fight back with the same level of strategic precision she'd used against them. In the end, Victoria Sterling learned that the art of destruction works both ways, and that some people are far more dangerous when they appear to be perfectly controlled. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever had to fight back against someone who underestimated your strength. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story will take you on another journey of justice, revenge, and the triumph of truth over deception. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.